The Manhattan skyline shimmered like a crown of restless stars, its lights pulsing against the ink-black night. High above it all, on the 80th floor of Garcia Tech Tower, Michael Garcia stood alone in his glass-walled penthouse. At 38, he was a man carved from ambition, sharp-jawed with eyes like polished steel, and a presence that commanded boardrooms. Forbes had crowned him a titan of tech, a billionaire whose algorithms reshaped industries. Yet as he gazed out over the city, he'd conquered the weight of his empire felt like a hollow victory. 3 years had passed since his wife Emily slipped away in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and heartbreak. Her heart had failed her. With it, she'd taken the last fragment of Michael's belief in a life beyond numbers. With its sleek marble floors and minimalist furniture, the penthouse was less a home than a mausoleum of his success. An untouched glass of bourbon sat on his desk, its amber glow catching the city's reflection. Beside it, a medical report edges worn from too many nights of rereading. Infertile. No viable options. The words were a wound that refused to heal, a reminder that the legacy he'd dreamed of, a family, a future, would never be his. The wind pressed softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a faint howl that couldn't drown out the silence within him. Then from somewhere far below, a sound drifted upward. A voice. Soft, unpolished, but achingly beautiful, like a melody born from sorrow. It was a folk song, one Michael didn't know yet. It stirred something dormant in his chest. Follow the drinking gourd. The words floated fragile but unyielding, weaving through the concrete and steel of his tower. Michael frowned. The building should have been empty at this hour, save for security and the night cleaning crew. But this voice, it wasn't meant for an audience. It was private, raw, like a prayer whispered in the dark. He closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him. For the first time in months, he didn't think of Emily, or the report, or the boardroom battles awaiting him tomorrow. There was only the faint and flickering song, like a candle in a storm. Maybe it was fate, or perhaps he was just tired of his own ghosts. However, Michael Garcia, a man who measured life in data and deals, felt something shift inside him. He wasn't alone tonight. 10 floors below, in the polished corridors of Garcia Tech's lower levels, Aaliyah Sanchez moved with quiet purpose. Her broom glided across the marble floor, its whispers blending with the hum of sleeping machines. At 27, Aaliyah was a study in resilience. Her dark brown skin glowed under the bluish emergency lights. Her coiled hair pinned tightly back, revealing a faint silver scar below her jaw, a relic of a childhood fall from a Harlem fire escape. Her navy uniform hung loosely on her slender frame, dusted with lint from work hours. But her voice, low, velvety, and steady, carried the weight of her world. Follow the drinking gourd. She sang the melody, a gift from her mother Lena, who'd hummed it in their cramped Harlem apartment, where love was richer than heat or money. Aaliyah sang not to be heard because silence felt too heavy to bear. At 16, she'd lost Lena to breast cancer, and with her, the dream of college. Instead, she'd taken on the care of her younger brother Jamal, now 20, and studying engineering at Howard University. Every paycheck she earned went to him to keep his dreams alive, while hers waited folded into the pages of a worn poetry book tucked in her cleaning cart. Tonight her voice held a deeper ache. Not despair, but something older, heavier, a longing she couldn't name. She didn't know that her song had traveled upward past glass and steel to a man who hadn't truly listened in years. Michael took the private executive elevator without a plan, guided only by that voice. He stepped onto the 10th floor, calm and still air, and saw her, a lone figure sweeping the hallway, her silhouette framed against the city's glow. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her song continued, soft and unhurried, wrapping the space in warmth. He stood 15 feet away, silent as snow. Her presence was unlike anything in his world. No polish, no agenda, just a woman singing to the night. He didn't know her name, but he couldn't look away. Aaliyah reached the end of the corridor, her broom's bristles whispering against the floor. Her song faded naturally, dissolving into the hum of fluorescent lights. She leaned against the handle, stretching her shoulders, unaware of the figure watching her. Then, as if sensing a shift in the air, she turned. Her eyes, large, dark, and sharp with intelligence, widened in shock. Her grip tightened on the broom. I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping back, brushing her uniform as if to erase herself. She knew who he was. Everyone at Garcia Tech did. Michael Garcia, the billionaire CEO, is a name etched in headlines and corporate emails, not in the dim halls of the night shift. "No need to apologize," Michael said, his voice softer than he intended, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. Aaliyah blinked, her mind racing. Had she broken a rule? Was singing forbidden? Would this cost her job? "I didn't mean to disturb anyone," she said quickly, fingers twisting around the broom handle. "I didn't think anyone was here," Michael replied. "You didn't disturb me." Stepping closer, his gaze steady, but not imposing, quite the opposite. She frowned, unsure what to make of him. She was used to invisibility suits passing her without a glance, her existence confined to the margins of the building's schedule. But now she was seen. "What's the song?" he asked, tilting his head. She hesitated, then answered, "Follow the drinking gourd. An old spiritual my mother taught me." Her voice softened, touched with memory. She said it was about finding your way even in the dark. Michael didn't move, but something in him stirred. Finding your way even in the dark. The words felt like a mirror held too close. "Your mother sounds remarkable," he said quietly. "She was," Aaliyah replied, her shoulders easing slightly. "She taught me to find light when there's none." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, like a breath shared between strangers who'd stumbled into something tangible. Aaliyah glanced at her broom, suddenly aware of the gulf between them, her in her worn uniform, him in his tailored shirt, the man who owned the tower she cleaned. She said I should get back to work cautious, but not cold. As she turned, Michael spoke hesitantly. "There's a cafe around the corner. Open all night. Terrible coffee, but it's warm." She froze, her hand hovering over her cart. Slowly, she turned back. "Are you always this direct with employees, Mr. Garcia?" A faint smile touched his lips, only when I didn't know what else to say. Aaliyah studied him, searching for pretense. But his eyes held no mockery, only a quiet curiosity, and something else, weariness perhaps, like a man carrying a weight too long. "Maybe," she said, her voice steady, despite the flutter in her chest. "One cup." They stepped into the elevator together, him in his rumpled shirt, her with lint on her sleeve. Neither knew this simple act would unravel their worlds thread by fragile thread. The cafe on Lexington and 53rd was a tired place, its leather booths cracked, its lighting dim. But under its amber glow, it felt like a sanctuary from Manhattan's chaos. Aaliyah sat across from Michael, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, her uniform still damp from the misty streets. Michael's coat lay draped over his chair, his phone face down. They were alone in their booth, though the world hummed faintly around them, an older man with a newspaper, a student asleep over her laptop. "I don't usually do this," Aaliyah said, breaking the silence. "Talk to strangers, especially not strangers on magazine covers." Michael chuckled, his voice low. "That makes two of us. Coffee tastes better when you're not alone, though." She glanced up, wary but not unkind. "Why were you on the 10th floor at that hour?" He looked at the rain-streaked window. "Couldn't sleep. The office feels less empty than my place." Aaliyah nodded, recognizing the truth in his voice. She sipped her coffee, bitter as promised. "My mother used to say the night doesn't lie. It's when the world stops pretending." Michael's gaze returned to her. "She sounds like she was wise." "She was," Aaliyah said, a small smile flickering. "And loud. And stubborn. And everything I try to be." He leaned forward slightly. "What happened to her?" "Breast cancer. I was 16. She said it like a fact she'd long accepted. I left college to raise my brother Jamal. He's at Howard now, engineering. Michael said you gave up a lot for him, not with pity but respect. I didn't give it up, she corrected, straightening. I just put it on hold. He nodded, and for a moment, they sat in a silence that felt like understanding. The 10th floor of Garcia Tech Tower was a world of its own at 2 a.m., a labyrinth of polished marble and dimmed lights where the hum of sleeping servers felt like a heartbeat. Aaliyah Sanchez pushed her cleaning cart through the corridor, the wheels squeaking faintly against the floor. Her navy uniform was creased from work hours, but her posture remained steady, as if defiance was woven into her spine. The memory of last night's coffee with Michael Garcia lingered like a half-remembered dream, both unsettling and warm. She told herself it was a fluke, a moment that belonged to the night, not her reality. Yet, as she reached the break room, her breath caught. Tucked beneath a paper cup on the table was a folded note, its edges crisp, the handwriting deliberate. Thank you for the song. It stayed with me. M. A croissant sat beside it, still warm, its buttery scent mingling with the room's stale air. Aaliyah's fingers hesitated before picking up the note, her heart stuttering. She hadn't expected this. Not from him, the man whose name adorned the building she cleaned. She glanced around, half expecting someone to step out and call it a prank, but the hallway was empty. She unfolded the note again, reading the words as if they might dissolve. They didn't. Instead, they settled into her, heavy and real. She pulled a pen from her cart and scribbled on a napkin. Thank you for listening. A. She left it under the cup, her pulse quickening as she walked away. It was just a note, she told herself. Just words. But her steps felt lighter as she returned to her work. Days passed, and the notes became a quiet ritual. A scrap of paper left in the break room, a line of poetry tucked into her cart, a muffin with a sticky note. For long nights. M. Aaliyah responded in kind, a sketch of a bird on a napkin, a quote from Langston Hughes. Hold fast to dreams. Their words danced in the margins of their worlds, fragile but persistent, like whispers carried on a breeze. They didn't see each other again, but the notes were enough to make Aaliyah hum as she swept, her voice softer now, as if guarding a secret. She didn't tell anyone, not her best friend Elena Carter, who'd tease her mercilessly about pen pals with billionaires. Not Jamal, who'd called last week, his voice bright with news about a robotics project, but edged with guilt for her sacrifices. Aaliyah kept the notes close folded in the pocket of her uniform, a private rebellion against the life she'd been told to accept. But secrets, even small ones, can slip through cracks. Tanya Hale, a janitorial supervisor with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes, noticed first. She'd worked at Garcia Tech for over a decade, her resentment polished as brightly as the floors she oversaw. Aaliyah had once considered her a friend. Late-night chats over vending machine coffee had bonded them through long shifts. But something had shifted in Tanya lately, her smiles turning brittle, her words barbed. That night, as Aaliyah swept the corridor, Tanya leaned against a doorway, arms crossed, her gaze cutting. Leaving notes now. Tanya's voice was low, laced with something unkind. What's next? Aaliyah dinner invitations. Aaliyah's broom stilled. She met Tanya's stare, her voice calm but firm. I don't know what you're talking about. Tanya smirked, stepping closer. Don't play dumb. I saw the napkin, the croissant. You think you're invisible, but people notice when the help gets cozy with the boss. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. Mind your business, Tanya. It's everyone's business when you're flirting with the man who signs our checks. Tanya snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. You think you're special? He's just bored. The words stung, but Aaliyah didn't flinch. If you've got something to say, say it. Don't hide behind whispers. Tanya's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more, turning on her heel and disappearing down the hall. Aaliyah resumed sweeping, her movements deliberate, but her chest ached. She'd spent years being invisible. Now, being seen felt like a punishment. Michael sat in his office upstairs, the city's glow filtering through the blinds. The bourbon on his desk remained untouched, replaced by a coffee cup he hadn't bothered to rinse. He'd spent the morning deflecting questions from Charles Wakefield, his COO, and closest confidant about the upcoming merger. But his mind wasn't on deals or stock prices. It was on a napkin tucked in his drawer, Aaliyah's handwriting looping across it. The silence between verses lingers longest. He didn't know why her words stayed with him, why they felt like a lifeline in a sea of boardroom battles. But each note, each fragment of her made the tower feel less like a cage. He pulled out a pen, scribbling, "Your voice reminds me what honesty sounds like. M." He'd leave it tonight in the break room where she'd find it. It was reckless. He knew Charles would call it a liability, but Michael didn't care. Not this time. That night, Aaliyah found the note under a paper cup, her fingers trembling as she read it. She stood by the 10th floor window, the city sprawling below its lights, flickering like promises she'd never trusted. She thought of Jamal, her mother's laughter, and the poetry book in her cart. And now this, a man who saw her not as a shadow, but as a voice worth hearing. She didn't write back that night. Instead, she sang again, softer this time, the melody weaving through the empty halls. She didn't know Michael was there watching from the shadows, his breath catching, as her voice filled the air. The next evening, Aaliyah arrived at work to find the break room buzzing. Two co-workers fell silent as she entered, their glances sharp and knowing. She ignored them, but the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken words. Tanya stood by the coffee machine, her smile cold. "Careful, Aaliyah," she said, barely above a whisper. "People talk when you reach too high." Aaliyah didn't respond, but her heart sank. She finished her shift in silence, her song buried deep. When she checked her cart, another note waited. "I don't know why your words stay with me, but I'm glad they do. M." She folded it carefully, slipping it into her pocket, but Tanya's words echoed louder. Upstairs, Charles cornered Michael in his office. "There's talk," he said, his voice low, "about you and a janitor. Notes, late-night visits. It's getting out." Michael's jaw tightened. "Let it." Charles sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're playing with fire, Mike. The board's already on edge about the merger. This could tip things. This could tip." "I'm not hiding," Michael said, his voice steady. "Not from them. Not from her." Charles studied him, then nodded. "Just be careful. The world loves a scandal." That night, Aaliyah stood by the 10th floor window, her broom idle. She pulled Michael's latest note from her pocket, rereading it. The city hummed below, indifferent to her heart's quiet storm. She didn't know what this was, friendship fantasy, or something more dangerous. But for the first time, she wondered what it would be like to be seen, not as a shadow, but as a woman who mattered. She wrote back, "Sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. A." And as she left the note in the break room, she didn't see Tanya watching from the doorway, her phone glowing with a photo of the napkin ready to send to someone who'd pay for the story. The air in Garcia Tech Tower felt thicker now, as if the walls were holding their breath. Aaliyah Sanchez moved through her shift on the 10th floor with mechanical precision, her broom tracing familiar paths across the marble. The notes from Michael Garcia, once a quiet spark in her nights, now felt like a weight in her pocket. She hadn't written back since Tanya's barbed words in the break room, and the silence between her and Michael stretched like a taut wire. The city outside glittered, indifferent, its lights winking through the windows as if mocking her hesitation. Aaliyah's cart rattled as she pushed it toward the executive lounge, her mind replaying Tanya's warning. "People talk when you reach too high." The words clung to her, sharp and familiar, echoing the lessons of her childhood. Stay small, stay safe. Don't draw eyes. But Michael's notes, his quiet presence, had made her want to believe in something more. She shook her head, trying to focus on the work, on the rhythm of sweeping that had carried her through years of grief and sacrifice. Yet her fingers brushed the folded napkin in her pocket, his words etched in her mind. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. In his office 80 floors above, Michael sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across his face. The merger talks with a rival tech firm had grown tense with board members circling like vultures. But his thoughts were elsewhere on Aaliyah, on the notes they'd traded like fragile promises. He hadn't seen her since the cafe, but her absence only sharpened his need to hear her voice again, to feel the honesty that cut through his world of calculated moves. He pulled a piece of paper from his drawer, scribbling, "Your silence is louder than I expected. I'm still listening. M." He'd leave it tonight, though. Some of him wondered if she'd stopped writing back for good. Downstairs, Aaliyah's shift ended with a flicker of relief. She avoided the break room where Tanya's presence lingered like a storm cloud. Instead, she slipped into a stairwell, pulling out her poetry book to read under the dim light. Langston Hughes' words steadied her. "I, too, am America." She whispered the lines, her voice a quiet defiance against the whispers creeping through the tower. But as she turned the page, a new note fell out tucked between the pages. "I don't know what you're afraid of, but I hope it's not me. M." Her breath hitched. He'd found her cart and sanctuary, and left this for her to see. She wanted to write back to tell him she wasn't afraid, not of him, but of the world that would punish them for daring to connect. But before she could decide, her phone buzzed. A text from Elena Carter, her best friend, a painter who lived for late-night talks and unfiltered truth. "Girl, you okay? Jamal says you're acting weird. Spill." Aaliyah smiled faintly, typing back. "Just tired. Long shifts." She couldn't tell Elena about Michael, not yet. The notes, the coffee, the way her heart raced at his words, they were hers alone, too fragile to share. But the tower had eyes. As Aaliyah left the stairwell, Tanya was leaning against the wall, her phone glowing in her hand. Late night again. Tanya's voice was smooth, but her eyes were cold. "You're getting careless, Aaliyah. Leaving notes where anyone can find them." Aaliyah's grip tightened on her book. "What I do is my business." Tanya stepped closer, her smile sharp. "Not when it's with him. You think you're invisible. Cameras see everything. And people, they're watching." She held up her phone, showing a blurry photo of Aaliyah reading in the stairwell, the note in her hand. Aaliyah's stomach dropped. "Who else has that?" she asked, her voice low. Tanya shrugged. "No one. Yet. You should know what you're risking." She left Aaliyah frozen, the photo burning in her mind. She didn't know if Tanya was bluffing, but the threat felt real, a reminder that her world built on quiet survival could crumble under scrutiny. Upstairs, Michael met with Charles Wakefield in the boardroom, the city's skyline a stark backdrop. Charles paced his tablet, glowing with emails. "The merger's shaky," he said. "Investors are nervous, and now there's chatter about you. About her." He didn't say Aaliyah's name, but its weight hung in the air. "People saw you on the 10th floor, Mike. They're talking. It's not just gossip leverage for anyone who wants to push you out." Michael's jaw clenched. "Let them try." Charles stopped pacing, his voice softer. "I'm not saying you're wrong to care about her, but this could cost you the company. You ready for that?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He thought of Aaliyah's voice, her words on paper, the way she'd looked at him in the cafe, not as a billionaire, but as a man. "I'm not hiding her," he said finally. "She's not a scandal." Charles sighed. "Then you'd better be ready for the fallout." That night, Aaliyah stood by the 10th floor window, the city sprawling below, like a map of unreachable dreams. She held Michael's latest note, her fingers tracing his words. She wanted to believe in them and him, but Tanya's photo loomed like a warning. She wrote back, her pen hesitating. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm so scared of what happens when the world sees us. A." She left it in the break room tucked under a coffee cup and walked away, her heart heavy with doubt. Michael found the note an hour later, his breath catching as he read it. He didn't know about Tanya's photo, but he felt the shift in Aaliyah's words, a caution that hadn't been there before. He wanted to find her and talk, but his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. Some secrets don't stay quiet. Attached was a grainy image of him leaving the break room, the note in his hand. His blood ran cold. Someone was watching not just Aaliyah, but him. He called Charles immediately. We've got a problem, he said, his voice tight. Someone's leaking photos from inside the building. Charles cursed softly. I'll get it on it. But Mike, this isn't just about you anymore. Whoever's doing this wants to hurt her too. Michael's hand tightened around the phone. He thought of Aaliyah alone on the 10th floor, her voice carrying through the dark. He'd built an empire on control, but this her-them was something he couldn't calculate. He scribbled a new note. Whatever they throw at us, I'm not going anywhere. M. He left it where she'd find it. But as he rode the elevator back to his penthouse, a new fear settled in his chest. Not for his company, but for the woman who'd made him feel alive again. Aaliyah finished her shift in silence, her song buried under the weight of Tanya's threat. As she stepped into the cold October air, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Elena. You're not telling me something. I'm coming over tomorrow. No excuses. Aaliyah sighed, slipping the phone into her pocket. She didn't see the figure across the street, watching her leave their camera lens, catching the faint glow of her silhouette against the tower's glass doors. The October rain fell in a steady drizzle, blurring the edges of Manhattan's skyline. Inside Garcia Tech Tower, the 10th floor, was a quiet cocoon, its polished surfaces reflecting the faint glow of emergency lights. Aaliyah Sanchez moved through her shift deliberately, her broom sweeping in slow, measured strokes. The notes from Michael Garcia, once a secret warmth, now felt like a spark too close to kindling. Tanya's photo and veiled threat lingered in Aaliyah's mind, a reminder that their fragile connection was no longer theirs alone. She hadn't written back to Michael's latest note. Whatever they throw at us, I'm not going anywhere. But its words burned in her pocket, both a comfort and a challenge. She paused by the 10th floor window, the city's lights smudged by rain. Her reflection stared back, a woman caught between worlds, one where she scrubbed floors to keep her brother's dreams alive, and another where a man like Michael saw her as more than a shadow. She wanted to trust him, to believe in the possibility of them. But Tanya's words echoed. People talk when you reach too high. Aaliyah's life had been built on staying low and surviving. Reaching felt like tempting fate. Michael stood in his penthouse upstairs, the rain tapping against the glass like a restless pulse. His laptop glowed with merger documents, but his focus was on the note in his hand. Aaliyah's handwriting careful and precise. I'm not afraid of you. I'm so scared of what happens when the world sees us. The anonymous text he'd received, a photo of himself in the break room, note in hand, gnawed at him. Someone was watching, turning their quiet exchanges into ammunition. He'd asked Charles to trace the source, but the IT team had found nothing. Michael's world was built on control, yet this felt like a game he couldn't win, not with logic or power. He needed to see her talk and bridge the distance her silence had carved. He scribbled a new note. Meet me in the garden behind the tower. No notes, no shadows. Just us. M. He slipped it into an envelope and left it in the break room, hoping she'd come. The garden, a forgotten pocket of lavender and stone, tucked between the tower's wings, was the only place in his world that felt untouched by judgment. Aaliyah found the note at the end of her shift, her fingers trembling as she read it. The garden. She'd passed it countless times, its benches empty, its lamp flickering like a tired star. The idea of meeting Michael there face to face felt reckless. But the weight of his words, "just us," pulled her forward. She slipped out of the tower, her work coat damp from the drizzle, and went to the garden. The air smelled of wet earth and lavender, starkly contrasting with the sterile halls she knew so well. Michael was already there, sitting on a bench, his coat folded over his arm. He stood when he saw her, his eyes searching hers. "You came," he said, his voice low, almost surprised. "I wasn't sure I would." Aaliyah admitted, her breath fogging in the cool air. She stayed a few steps away, her hands tucked into her pockets. It's getting complicated." Michael nodded, his expression soft but resolute. "I know. The photo, the rumors, it's not just us anymore." Aaliyah's gaze dropped to the ground where rain pooled around the bench. "Someone's watching us, Michael. Tanya showed me a picture of me reading your note. She said people are talking that I'm reaching too high." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "Tanya's wrong. You're not reaching. You're already there." She looked up, her eyes sharp with doubt. "Am I? Or am I just a story people will tell to tear you down?" Michael stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. "You're not a story, Aaliyah. You're the only real thing in my world right now." Her breath caught, and for a moment she wanted to believe him. But the weight of Tanya's photo and the break room whispers pressed against her chest. She said, "You don't know what it's like, quiet but firm. To be seen as less before you even open your mouth. To have every move judged. I don't," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "But I know what it's like to feel alone in a group of people. And I know I don't think that way with you." Aaliyah's throat tightened. She wanted to step forward to close the distance, but fear held her back, not of him, but of what loving him might cost. "What happens when this gets out?" she asked. "When it's not just notes and gardens, but headlines and cameras?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He looked at the lavender bushes, their leaves trembling in the rain. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I'd rather face that with you than hide without you." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. Aaliyah's eyes glistened, but she blinked back the tears. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," he said, taking another step. "But it's worth it." They stood in silence for a moment, the rain a soft curtain around them. Then Aaliyah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my life carrying other people's dreams. My brother's, my mother's. I don't know how to hold my own." Michael reached for her hand, his touch tentative but warm. "Then let me carry them with you." She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his cold against his warmth. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but a choice to stand in the rain and let herself be seen. Across the street, a camera shutter clicked, its sound swallowed by the drizzle. Tanya stood under an awning, her phone in hand, capturing the moment. She sent the photo to an unknown number, her lips curling with satisfaction. The response came quickly. "Good. Keep watching. We'll make sure this buries them." Inside the tower, Charles waited in Michael's office, his tablet glowing with a new email from an investor. "They're pulling out," he said when Michael returned, his coat still damp. "The rumors about you and her, it's spooking them. They're calling it a distraction." Michael's eyes darkened. "It's not a distraction. It's my life." Charles leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Then you need to decide how much you will lose for it. Because they're not just coming for you, Mike. They're coming for her." Michael didn't respond, but his mind raced. He thought of Aaliyah in the garden, her hand in his, her voice when she sang. He'd built Garcia Tech on calculated risks, but this was something else, a leap into the unknown, without guarantee of safety. Aaliyah returned to her apartment, the rain-soaked note still in her pocket. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "I'm here tomorrow. You're telling me what's going on." Aaliyah sighed, setting the phone down. She stood by her window, the city's lights blurring through the rain. For the first time, she let herself imagine a world where she didn't just survive, but lived fully, fiercely with someone who saw her. But as she closed her eyes, Tanya's photo flashed in her mind, a warning that the world was watching, ready to tear that dream apart. The rain had stopped, but the air in Manhattan hung heavy with the scent of wet pavement and unspoken tensions. Aaliyah Sanchez stepped into Garcia Tech Tower for her night shift, her work boots leaving faint prints on the polished lobby floor. The weight of the previous night's meeting in the garden clung to her. Michael's hand in hers, his words promising a shared burden, and the unseen camera that had captured it all. Tanya's photo, the whispers, the anonymous text with a picture of her in Michael's penthouse, were no longer just threats, but cracks in the fragile world she and Michael had begun to build. Once warmed by his notes, her heart now wrestled with a new fear: betrayal, not by him, but by the world that refused to let them be. She pushed her cleaning cart through the 10th floor corridor, the familiar hum of the building doing little to soothe her. The note she'd found last night. Meet me in the garden. No notes, no shadows, just us. Had been a lifeline, but now it felt like a tether to a storm she couldn't outrun. She hadn't written back, not yet. Her fingers brushed the poetry book in her cart, its pages worn from nights spent seeking solace in words. Tonight, she didn't sing. The silence felt safer, but it was a lie. She wasn't safe. Not when someone was watching, turning her moments with Michael into weapons. Upstairs, Michael Garcia stood in his office. The city's skyline, a jagged silhouette against the night. His desk was cluttered with reports, but his focus was on his phone, where the anonymous text still lingered. Careful who you trust. Some secrets don't stay quiet. The photo of him in the break room holding Aaliyah's note was a violation he couldn't shake. He'd ordered a complete security sweep, but the IT team had only confirmed the breach from within the building. Someone close, someone trusted, was unraveling their fragile connection. He wanted to find Aaliyah, to tell her they'd face this together, but her silence since the garden gnawed at him. Had he pushed too far? He pulled a piece of paper from his desk, writing, "I don't know who's watching, but they don't get to decide what we are. Meet me tonight. M." He folded it carefully, intending to leave it in the break room, but his phone buzzed with a message from Charles Wakefield. It found something. "Call me now." Michael dialed immediately, his pulse quickening. "It's bad," Charles said, his voice tight. "The breach came from your guest Wi-Fi. Someone accessed it inside your penthouse mic within the last week." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. "That's impossible. No one's been in my place except—" He stopped, his mind flashing to Aaliyah, to the night she'd stood by his window, unaware of the camera capturing her silhouette. "No," he said, more to himself than Charles. "It's not her." "You sure?" Charles pressed. "You don't know her, not really. And the timing." "It's not her." Michael snapped, his voice like steel, but a flicker of doubt crept in unbidden, and he hated himself for it. He ended the call and stared at the note in his hand, the words blurring. He wouldn't believe it, couldn't. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it burned. Downstairs, Aaliyah's shift dragged on the weight of Tanya's threat, pressing harder each passing hour. She avoided the break room, sticking to the far end of the corridor, where the shadows felt kinder. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Elena. "I'm at your place tomorrow. No dodging me." Aaliyah sighed, knowing Elena's persistence would force the truth out of her. She wanted to tell her about Michael, the notes, the garden, but the words felt too heavy, too risky. As she cleaned the executive lounge, she found a new note tucked under a coffee cup. "I don't know who's watching, but they don't get to decide what we are. Meet me tonight. M." Her heart stuttered. She wanted to go see him and believe in his words, but the memory of Tanya's photo of the anonymous text held her back. She slipped the note into her pocket, her resolve wavering. Tanya appeared near the end of her shift, her presence like a storm cloud in the hallway. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her tone deceptively light. "No songs, No notes. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. Leave it alone, Tanya. Tanya stepped closer, her eyes glinting. I told you, Aaliyah, you're playing a dangerous game, and when it falls apart, don't cry to me. She held up her phone, showing a new photo of Aaliyah and Michael in the garden, his hand on hers. This is already out there. You think you're untouchable because he's got money. Aaliyah's blood ran cold. Who did you send that to? Tanya smirked. Does it matter? The world's going to eat this up. You and your billionaire. It's a headline waiting to happen. Aaliyah turned away, her hands shaking as she pushed her cart. She didn't finish her shift. She couldn't. She slipped through a side exit, the city's damp air hitting her like a slap. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. You're not invisible anymore. Choose your next move carefully. Attached was the same garden photo Tanya had shown her. Aaliyah's knees weakened, but she kept walking, her mind spiraling. In his penthouse, Michael waited for Aaliyah in the garden, the lamp casting a faint glow over the lavender. She didn't come. He checked his phone, hoping for a message, a note, anything. Instead, he found an email from Charles, a screenshot of a gossip blog. The headline screaming, Billionaire's secret romance with janitor sparks controversy. Below it was the photo from the garden, Aaliyah's face clear, her hand in his. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just a leak, it was a calculated strike. He called Aaliyah once, twice, 3 times. No answer. He paced the garden, the rain-soaked bench cold under his hand. He thought of her words in the cafe, her fear of being seen, judged. He'd promised to stand with her. But now the world was closing in, and he didn't know how to shield her. Aaliyah, meanwhile, boarded a subway to Harlem, the train's rumble drowning out her thoughts. She didn't go home. Instead, she walked to the old church where her mother used to take her, its stone steps, worn smooth by decades of prayers. She sat there, the night air sharp against her cheeks, and pulled Michael's note from her pocket. They don't get to decide what we are. She wanted to believe it, but the photos, texts, and whispers were louder than his words. Her phone buzzed again. Elena. I'm worried. Where are you? Aaliyah typed back. I'm okay, just need space. But she wasn't okay. She was angry not at Michael, but at the world that made her feel like loving him was a crime. She was angry at herself for wanting to answer his call and run to the garden despite everything. Back at the tower, Michael stood in his office, staring at the gossip blog on his laptop. Charles burst in his face, grim. This is just the start, Mike. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're saying you're a liability. Let them. Michael said, his voice cold. I'm not denying her. Charles shook his head. You're not just fighting for you anymore. You're fighting for her. And whoever's behind this, they're not done. Michael's eyes fell to the note on his desk. Aaliyah's handwriting. A quiet rebellion against the chaos. He didn't know who was orchestrating this, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't let them take her from him. Not without a fight. The Harlem night was alive with the hum of streetlights and the distant pulse of music from a corner bar. Aaliyah Sanchez stood beneath an old oak tree on 125th Street, its gnarled branches a silent witness to her childhood. The air carried the scent of roasted peanuts and rain-soaked brick, grounding her in a place that felt like home, despite the chaos swirling in her heart. Tanya's photos in the tower, the anonymous one from Michael's penthouse, and the garden snapshot plastered on gossip blogs had shaken her. They weren't just images, but invasions, stripping away the quiet sanctuary she'd found with Michael Garcia. She hadn't answered his calls, not because she didn't want to, but because she needed to remember who she was before the world turned her into a headline. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, knowing it was likely Elena Carter, her best friend, demanding answers. Instead, she clutched Michael's latest note found in the break room before she'd fled her shift. They don't get to decide what we are. The words were a lifeline, but they couldn't erase the sting of being watched, judged, and reduced to a scandal. Aaliyah's life had been built on resilience, on carrying her family's dreams through grief and sacrifice. But this felt different. Loving Michael meant stepping into a spotlight that burned. Across the city, in the sterile glow of his penthouse, Michael stood by the window, the skyline a blur of light and shadow. The gossip blog's headline, "Billionaire's Secret Romance with Janitor Sparks Controversy," glowed on his laptop, and the garden photo was a stark reminder of their exposure. He'd spent the day fending off Charles Wakefield's warnings about the board's unrest and the shaky merger, but his mind was on Aaliyah. Her silence since the garden was louder than any boardroom argument. He'd written another note and left it in the break room, despite knowing she might not come. "I'm not running. I hope you're not either. M." But as he stared at the city below, doubt crept in, not about her, but about whether he could protect her from the storm he'd pulled her into. Aaliyah's phone buzzed again, and this time she checked it. A text from Jamal, her younger brother. "I'm in town, at your place. Where are you?" Her heart sank. Jamal, studying engineering at Howard, rarely came to New York unannounced. She typed back, "Be there soon." The thought of facing him with his sharp questions and unspoken resentment felt like another weight. She slipped Michael's note into her pocket and walked toward her apartment, the Harlem streets a maze of memory and longing. When she arrived, Jamal leaned against her door, his bomber jacket damp from the night air. His eyes, so like their mother's, held a mix of worry and frustration. "You look like hell," he said, stepping aside as she unlocked the door. "Thanks, Aaliyah," muttered, tossing her keys onto the counter. Her apartment was small, a single room, with creaky floors and a dripping sink, but it was hers. She gestured for Jamal to sit, but he stood arms crossed. "I saw the news," he said, his voice low. "You and some billionaire sue. What's going on?" Aaliyah's stomach twisted. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" He pressed his tone sharp. "You're all over the internet looking cozy with a guy who owns the building you clean. Aunt Myra's freaking out saying you're forgetting where you came from." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. "I haven't forgotten anything. I'm still paying your tuition, am I?" Jamal flinched, his eyes narrowing. "That's not fair. I didn't ask you to give up your life for me." "You didn't have to," she said, softer now. "You're my brother. I chose this." He shook his head, pacing. "And now you're choosing him. A guy like that. You think he gets what it's like for us? For you?" Aaliyah's throat tightened. "He sees me, Jamal, more than anyone in that building ever has." "See you?" Jamal scoffed. "Or sees a story. You're not one of them, Sue. You're in Harlem. You're us." His words cut deep, echoing her own fears. She wanted to tell him about the notes, the garden, the way Michael's presence made her feel like more than a shadow. But the photos, the whispers, held her back. "I'm still me," she said finally. "I'm just trying to figure out what that means." Jamal softened just a fraction. "Just be careful. People like him, they don't live in our world." After he left, Aaliyah sat at her kitchen table, the silence heavy. She pulled out Michael's note, rereading it. Her phone buzzed. "Elena. I'm here tomorrow. You're spilling everything." Aaliyah sighed, knowing she couldn't hide anymore. She wrote a note of her own. "I'm not running, but I need time. A." She didn't know if she'd leave it, but the act of writing steadied her. At Garcia Tech, Michael met Charles in the boardroom, the air thick with tension. Charles slid a tablet across the table, showing an email from a board member. "Your personal choices are jeopardizing the merger. Address this, or we will." Michael's eyes darkened. "They're using her to get to me," he said, his voice low. Charles nodded. "It's not just gossip anymore. Someone's leaking internal emails, sensitive ones. The timing's too perfect. Whoever's behind the photos has an agenda." Michael's mind raced. The anonymous text, the garden photo, the breach from his penthouse Wi-Fi. It was a coordinated attack. Find out who he said. "I don't care what it takes." Charles hesitated. Mike, if this goes public, it'll hit her harder than you. You ready for that? Michael didn't answer. He thought of Aaliyah's voice, her hand in his, how she'd stood in the garden, unafraid, but unsure. She's worth it, he said finally. That night, Aaliyah returned to the tower, her resolve fragile but intact. She avoided the break room, but as she cleaned the executive lounge, she found Michael's note. I'm not running. I hope you're not either. Her heart ached. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the possibility of us. But as she slipped her note, I'm not running, but I need time, under a coffee cup, she heard footsteps. Tanya stood in the doorway, her smile cold. She said, "You're still playing this game," holding up her phone. A new photo. Aaliyah leaving the tower last night, her face clear in the streetlight. This went to a blog an hour ago. You're famous now. Aaliyah's blood ran cold. Why are you doing this? Tanya's eyes glinted. Because you don't get to rise while the rest of us stay stuck. You think you're special. You're just a story he'll forget. Aaliyah didn't respond. She pushed past Tanya, her note still under the cup, and left the tower. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to her breaking heart. She didn't see Michael watching from his office window, his own note in hand, or the figure across the street snapping another photo, ready to fuel the fire that threatened to consume them both. The Harlem night was alive with the hum of streetlights and the distant pulse of a saxophone from an open window. Aaliyah Sanchez stood outside her apartment, her breath visible in the morning chill. The weight of the past week pressed against her chest. The photos, the headlines, Jamal's words, and Michael Garcia's note. I'm not running. I hope you're not either. She hadn't gone to the garden as he'd asked, hadn't answered his calls. Not because she didn't want to, but because she needed to find her footing in a world that seemed determined to pull her under. Inside, Elena Carter sat cross-legged on Aaliyah's worn couch, her paint-splattered jeans contrasting with the tidy room. Elena's eyes, sharp with intuition, tracked Aaliyah as she paced. Elena said, "You've been dodging me for days." Her voice firm but warm. "Spill it, Sue. What's got you so spooked?" Aaliyah hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. She hadn't told anyone about Michael. Not the notes, not the garden, not the way his presence made her heart ache with possibility. But Elena's gaze was unrelenting, and the truth spilled out like water from a cracked cup. "It's him," Aaliyah said, her voice low. "Michael Garcia. The guy who owns the tower." Elena's eyebrows shot up. "The billionaire? You're telling me you're tangled up with him? Notes, coffee, secret gardens." Aaliyah nodded, pulling a folded napkin from her pocket, Michael's latest note. It started small, just words. But now, photos are leaking. People are talking. Tanya's selling pictures to blogs, and someone's digging deeper, trying to ruin him. And me. Elena leaned forward, her expression softening. "And you're falling for him, aren't you?" Aaliyah's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to say it was just a fleeting connection, but the lie wouldn't come. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "He sees me, Elena. Really sees me. But the world, it's not going to let this be." Elena reached for her hand. "The world's always been loud, Sue. But you've never let it drown you out. Don't start now." Across the city, in the sterile glow of his penthouse, Michael stood by the window, the skyline a blur of light and shadow. The gossip blog's headline, "Billionaire's Secret Romance with Janitor Sparks Controversy," glowed on his laptop, and the garden photo was a stark reminder of their exposure. He'd spent the day fending off Charles Wakefield's warnings about the board's unrest and the shaky merger, but his mind was on Aaliyah. Her silence since the garden was louder than any boardroom argument. He'd written another note and left it in the break room, despite knowing she might not come. "I'm not running. I hope you're not either. M." But as he stared at the city below, doubt crept in. Not about her, but about whether he could protect her from the storm he'd pulled her into. Aaliyah's phone buzzed again, and this time she checked it. A text from Jamal, her younger brother. "I'm in town. At your place. Where are you?" Her heart sank. Jamal, studying engineering at Howard, rarely came to New York unannounced. She typed back, "Be there soon." The thought of facing him with his sharp questions and unspoken resentment felt like another weight. She slipped Michael's note into her pocket and walked toward her apartment, the Harlem streets a maze of memory and longing. When she arrived, Jamal leaned against her door, his bomber jacket damp from the night air. His eyes, so like their mother's, held a mix of worry and frustration. "You look like hell," he said, stepping aside as she unlocked the door. "Thanks, Aaliyah," muttered, tossing her keys onto the counter. Her apartment was small, a single room with creaky floors and a dripping sink, but it was hers. She gestured for Jamal to sit, but he stood arms crossed. "I saw the news," he said, his voice low. "You and some billionaire Sue, what's going on?" Aaliyah's stomach twisted. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" He pressed his tone sharp. "You're all over the internet looking cozy, with a guy who owns the building you clean. Aunt Myra's freaking out, saying you're forgetting where you came from." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. "I haven't forgotten anything. I'm still paying your tuition, am I?" Jamal flinched, his eyes narrowing. "That's not fair. I didn't ask you to give up your life for me." "You didn't have to," she said, softer now. "You're my brother. I chose this." He shook his head, pacing. "And now you're choosing him, a guy like that. You think he gets what it's like for us, for you." Aaliyah's throat tightened. "He sees me, Jamal, more than anyone in that building ever has." "See you?" Jamal scoffed. "Or sees a story. You're not one of them, Sue. You're in Harlem. You're us." His words cut deep, echoing her own fears. She wanted to tell him about the notes, the garden, the way Michael's presence made her feel like more than a shadow. But the photos, the whispers held her back. "I'm still me," she said finally. "I'm just trying to figure out what that means." Jamal softened just a fraction. "Just be careful. People like him, they don't live in our world." After he left, Aaliyah sat at her kitchen table, the silence heavy. She pulled out Michael's note, rereading it. Her phone buzzed. "Elena. I'm here tomorrow. You're spilling everything." Aaliyah sighed, knowing she couldn't hide anymore. She wrote a note of her own. "I'm not running, but I need time. A." She didn't know if she'd leave it, but the act of writing steadied her. At Garcia Tech, Michael met Charles in the boardroom, the air thick with tension. Charles slid a tablet across the table, showing an email from a board member. "Your personal choices are jeopardizing the merger. Address this, or we will." Michael's eyes darkened. "They're using her to get to me," he said, his voice low. Charles nodded. "It's not just gossip anymore. Someone's leaking internal emails, sensitive ones. The timing's too perfect. Whoever's behind the photos has an agenda." Michael's mind raced. The anonymous text, the garden photo, the breach from his penthouse Wi-Fi. It was a coordinated attack. "Find out who he said. I don't care what it takes." Charles hesitated. "Mike, if this goes public, it'll hit her harder than you. You ready for that?" Michael didn't answer. He thought of Aaliyah's voice, her hand in his, how she'd stood in the garden unafraid but unsure. "She's worth it," he said finally. That night, Aaliyah returned to the tower, her resolve fragile but intact. She avoided the break room, but as she cleaned the executive lounge, she found Michael's note. "I'm not running. I hope you're not either." Her heart ached. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the possibility of us. But as she slipped her note, "I'm not running, but I need time." Under a coffee cup, she heard footsteps. Tanya stood in the doorway, her smile cold. She said, "You're still playing this game," holding up her phone. A new photo, Aaliyah leaving the tower last night, her face clear in the streetlight. This went to a blog an hour ago. You're famous now. Aaliyah's blood ran cold. Why are you doing this? Tanya's eyes glinted. Because you don't get to rise while the rest of us stay stuck. You think you're special. You're just a story he'll forget. Aaliyah didn't respond. She pushed past Tanya, her notes still under the cup, and left the tower. Outside, the city hummed oblivious to her broken heart. She didn't see Michael watching from his office window, his own note in hand, or the figure across the street snapping another photo, ready to fuel the fire that threatened to consume them both. The Metropolitan Club glittered under the weight of its own grandeur, its chandeliers casting fractured light across crimson carpets and gilded ceilings. Aaliyah Sanchez stood at the edge of the ballroom, her black gown smooth as midnight, its simplicity a quiet rebellion against the opulence around her. She'd hesitated when Michael Garcia invited her to the Harrington Foundation Gala, knowing it would thrust their fragile connection into a room full of eyes that judged before they saw. But his words in the garden, "I love you, Aaliyah," had anchored her, and she'd chosen to step into his world, if only for one night. Her curls were pinned with delicate pearls, her posture steady despite the knot in her stomach. Michael stood beside her, his tailored suit sharp, but his presence softer, his hand grazing hers as they entered. The room turned not overtly, but in subtle shifts, glances that lingered, whispers cloaked in champagne flutes, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Aaliyah felt it all, the weight of being seen not as a woman, but as a story, a curiosity in a room of privilege. Michael leaned close, his voice low. "You're the only real thing here." She met his gaze, her lips curving slightly. "You say that now, but this room has teeth." He squeezed her hand. "Then we'll face them together." They moved through the crowd. Aaliyah's steps measured and her chin lifted. She'd spent years being invisible, scrubbing floors while others built empires. Now, standing beside Michael, she refused to shrink. But the air was thick with scrutiny, and she felt it like a current, electric, unforgiving. Upstairs in a private lounge overlooking the ballroom, Charles Wakefield watched the scene unfold, his tablet glowing with messages from the board. The gossip blogs had escalated, new headlines sprouting like weeds. Garcia Tech CEO's romance threatens merger. The photo from the garden had fueled the fire, and now with Aaliyah at the gala, the board's patience was fraying. Charles typed a quick message to Michael. "They're watching. Be careful." But he knew Michael wouldn't back down, not now, not after the garden. Below, the gala's host took the stage, his voice smooth as velvet. "Tonight, we honor Michael Garcia's contributions to sustainable tech and inclusive hiring." Polite applause followed, but it was sharp, measured, like a blade being honed. Michael stepped forward to accept the award, his expression calm, but his eyes flickering to Aaliyah, who remained seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The host continued almost as an afterthought, and a warm welcome to his guest, Ms. Aaliyah Sanchez. The word guest landed like a stone. Not partner, not companion, just guest, as if her presence needed softening, framing as temporary. Aaliyah's jaw tightened, but she kept her gaze steady, refusing to let the room see her flinch. The applause that followed was thinner, tinged with curiosity and something colder. She felt the shift, the invisible wall rising around her, built by smiles and sidelong glances. Michael returned to her side, his hand brushing her arm. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded, but her voice was low. "They're not clapping for me, Michael. They're waiting for me to fall." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Then we'll stand taller." Later, Aaliyah slipped onto the balcony, the city's lights sprawling below like a sea of stars. The noise of the gala clinking glasses murmured deals. The hum of a violin faded behind her. She gripped the stone balustrade, her gown swaying in the cool night air. The weight of the room's eyes lingered, each glance a reminder of the world she'd entered, a world that didn't want her. Michael found her there, his coat draped over his arm. "You disappeared," he said, his voice soft but laced with worry. "I needed air," Aaliyah said, her gaze fixed on the city. "This place. It's like walking into a mirror that only shows what people want to see." He stepped beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "They don't see you, not the way I do." She turned to him, her eyes searching. "And how do you see me?" Michael's voice was steady, unguarded. "As someone who makes every room feel alive. Who makes me feel alive." Her throat tightened, his words cutting through the noise in her head. "I want to believe that," she said. "But tonight, I felt like a prop. I'm here to prove something to them, not to be with you." Michael's jaw clenched, but his gaze didn't waver. "You're not a prop. You're the reason I'm here. If it meant keeping you, I'd walk away from all of this, the gala, the board, the company." Aaliyah's breath caught. "Don't say that. You don't mean it." "I do," he said, stepping closer. "I've built things my whole life, towers, deals, empires. But you're the first thing that feels like it matters." She looked away, her hands trembling against the balustrade. "This world of yours, it's not built for someone like me. They called me your guest, Michael, like I'm just passing through." "Then we'll change the world," he said, his voice fierce. "Or we'll make our own." Aaliyah's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "I'm trying," she whispered. "But it's hard to be brave when every eye in that room wants me to disappear." Michael pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "Then, let me be brave with you." They stood there, the city humming below their embrace, a quiet defiance against the storm brewing inside the ballroom. But across the street, a camera flashed its lens, catching the moment. Hidden in the shadows, Tanya sent the photo to an unknown number, her lips curling. The response was immediate. "This will bury him. Keep going." Inside, Charles intercepted Michael as they re-entered the ballroom. "Victor Langston's here," he whispered, his face grim. "He's talking to the board, stirring things up. He's the one paying Tanya." Michael's blood ran cold. Victor, his former partner, had always been ruthless, but this was personal. "What does he want?" Michael asked. Charles's voice was low. "To ruin you. And he's using Aaliyah to do it." Aaliyah overheard, her heart sinking. She'd known the photos weren't just Tanya's doing, but hearing Victor's name, a man who'd once been Michael's closest ally, made it real. "He's after me because of you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. Michael turned to her, his eyes fierce. "He's after me. You're just the way he thinks he can win." "Then let me fight too," Aaliyah said, her resolve hardening. "I'm not running anymore." They returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, the crowd's eyes sharper now, their whispers louder. But Aaliyah didn't shrink. She stood taller, her gaze meeting every stare, her presence a challenge. Michael squeezed her hand, and for the first time, they weren't just surviving the room, they were claiming it. The Harlem Community Center buzzed with life, its walls adorned with vibrant murals, and the air thick with the scent of fresh paint and coffee. Aaliyah Sanchez stood at the edge of the makeshift stage, her hands steady as she adjusted the microphone. She'd organized this poetry and music night to raise funds for a youth art program, a dream she'd carried since her mother's death, a dream she'd almost forgotten under the weight of headlines and betrayal. Tonight was her reclaiming a way to root herself in the world she'd always known, even as Michael Garcia's world pulled her elsewhere. The gala had left her bruised, the word guest still stinging, but standing here in Harlem felt like breathing again. The room was packed, locals, friends, and a few curious faces from the neighborhood. Elena Carter stood near the front, her paint-splattered jacket a badge of loyalty, her eyes gleaming with pride. Jamal lingered at the back, his expression unreadable, but softer than during their last talk. Aaliyah hadn't told Michael about the event. She needed this to be hers, not theirs. Not yet. But as she scanned the crowd, her heart skipped. He was there in the back, his suit jacket replaced with a simple sweater, his presence quiet but unmistakable. Aaliyah stepped to the microphone, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She said, "This is for my mother," the words carrying a weight only she could feel for the kids who need a place to dream. She began to read a poem she'd written, her voice weaving through the room like a melody. I am the root that breaks the stone, the song that hums in the dark. The crowd leaned in, captivated, as her words painted a world of resilience and hope. She ended with a song, Wade in the Water, its notes rising like a prayer, her voice raw and powerful. The applause was warm, uncalculated, unlike the gala's sharp claps. Elena rushed forward, hugging her tightly. "You owned that stage, Sue," she whispered. Jamal approached, his eyes glistening. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice low but sincere. Aaliyah's throat tightened, but she smiled his approval, grounding her. Michael waited until the crowd thinned, then approached, his eyes soft with awe. "I didn't know you could do that," he said, his voice quiet. "You were incredible." Aaliyah's lips curved, but her gaze was cautious. "I didn't know you'd come. I wouldn't miss it," he said, stepping closer. "You invited me to your world tonight. Thank you." She nodded, her heart torn between warmth and wariness. The gala had shown her the cost of stepping into his world. This was her reclaiming her own. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "Nice performance, but the spotlight won't save you." Attached was a photo of her on stage, taken from the back of the room. Her blood ran cold. Someone had followed her here to Harlem, to her sanctuary. Across the city, in the sterile glow of Garcia Tech's boardroom, Charles Wakefield handed Michael a tablet, his face grim. "We've got proof," he said. "Victor Langston's been funding Tanya's leaks. He's been buying internal emails and planting stories. He's meeting with investors tonight to push for your removal." Michael's jaw clenched, his mind flashing to Aaliyah's performance, her voice carrying a strength he hadn't fully grasped until now. "He's not just after me," Michael said. "He's trying to break her to get to me." Charles nodded. "He's smart. He knows Aaliyah's your weakness. The board's eating it up, calling your relationship a distraction, a risk to the merger." Michael's eyes darkened. "Then we fight back. Find me something on Victor. He's not clean." Charles hesitated. "It's risky, Mike. If we go after him, it'll escalate. And Aaliyah, she'll be caught in the crossfire." "I know," Michael said, his voice low, "but I'm not letting him destroy her." Back in Harlem, Aaliyah showed Elena the text, her hands trembling. Elena's face hardened. "This isn't just Tanya anymore," she said. "Someone's got it out for you. You need to tell Michael." Aaliyah shook her head. "I don't want him fighting my battles. This is my home, my fight." Elena grabbed her arm. "You're not alone, Sue. Don't act like you are." Aaliyah nodded, but the photo burned in her mind. She found Michael outside, leaning against the community center's brick wall, the streetlights casting long shadows. "You saw something," he said, reading her expression. She showed him the text and the photo. His face tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "Victor," he said, "the name is a curse. He's behind this. He's paying Tanya, leaking photos, trying to tear us apart." Aaliyah's stomach twisted. "Why me? Why does he care?" Michael stepped closer, his voice fierce. "Because you're proof I'm not the man he wants me to be. You're real Aaliyah. And he can't stand that." She looked away, the city's hum filling the silence. "I don't want to be a weapon in your war." "You're not," he said, taking her hand. "You're the reason I'm fighting. I love you, and I'm not letting him or anyone take that away." Aaliyah's eyes glistened, but she didn't pull away. "I performed tonight to remember who I am," she said. "But standing here with you, I'm starting to believe I can be more." Michael pulled her close, his arms a shield against the night. "Then let's be more, together." They stood there, the Harlem streets alive around them, their embrace a quiet defiance. But a figure lingered across the street, their camera flashing again. Tanya sent the photo to Victor Langston, and her message was simple. She's still in the game. The response was immediate. Good. Let's end it. The next morning, Aaliyah woke to a new headline. Garcia Tech CEO's lover performs for charity, or is it a PR stunt? The photo from the community center was plastered online. Her moment of triumph twisted into something calculated. Her phone buzzed with messages. Elena's outrage, Jamal's concern, and one from Michael. I'm coming over. We face this together. Aaliyah's heart raced, but she felt a spark of resolve. She wasn't just a headline. She was a woman with a voice and wouldn't let it be silenced. Michael met with Charles in his penthouse, who'd uncovered an email trail linking Victor to a rival company bidding against the merger. We can expose him, Charles said, but it'll mean dragging Aaliyah's name through the mud. Michael's fists clenched. Then we do it carefully. She's not collateral damage. Aaliyah, meanwhile, sat at her kitchen table, her poetry book open to a new page. She wrote, I am not their story. I am mine. She didn't know how to fight Victor, but she knew how to fight for herself and for Michael. As she waited for him to arrive, the city hummed outside a reminder that their love, battered but unbroken, was worth every battle. The Brooklyn brownstone stood quietly on a tree-lined street, its ivy-clad windows catching the soft light of a spring morning. Aaliyah Sanchez sat on the front steps, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, the warmth seeping into her palms. The house, with its creaky floors and crooked tulips in the backyard, was a far cry from the sterile grandeur of Garcia Tech Tower. It was hers and Michael Garcia's, a shared refuge from months of battles against headlines, betrayals, and a world that refused to let their love breathe. The latest blow, a headline twisting her Harlem performance into a calculated stunt, still lingered. But here in this moment, Aaliyah felt a fragile piece, agile. Inside, Michael fumbled in the kitchen, the clatter of pans punctuated by his muttered curses at a failed pancake attempt. Aaliyah smiled, the sound grounding her. Their life together wasn't perfect arguments over misplaced keys, debates about wall colors, but it was real, built on choices made in the face of fire. The memory of Victor Langston's schemes, Tanya's betrayal, and the board's threats felt distant now, like echoes from a storm they'd weathered. Aaliyah's phone buzzed on the step beside her, a text from Elena Carter. Art Center's opening next week. Are you ready to change the world? Aaliyah's heart swelled. The youth art program, born from her mother's dream and her own defiance, was becoming real. She'd poured her savings and her heart into it, with Michael matching every dollar, not as a savior, but as a partner. She typed back, "Ready. You bringing the paint?" Elena's reply was instant. "Always." Michael stepped outside, a plate of slightly charred pancakes in hand. "Breakfast," he said, his grin sheepish. "Or an attempt at it." Aaliyah laughed, taking the plate. "You're hopeless in the kitchen, but I'm trying," he said, sitting beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. The spring air was warm, the street alive with kids on bikes and neighbors calling greetings. For a moment, they were just two people on a stoop, not a billionaire, and a woman who'd once cleaned his floors. "You're thinking again," Michael said, his voice soft. "Always," Aaliyah replied, her gaze on the horizon. "About the center. About us. About how we got here." He nodded, his hand finding hers. "It wasn't easy." "It still isn't," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The world's still watching, Michael. They're waiting for us to fail." "Let them," he said, his tone steady. "We're not a headline anymore. We're this." He gestured to the brownstone, the tulips, the life they were building. Aaliyah's throat tightened. She thought of the gala, the photos, the way Victor had used her to strike at Michael. They'd fought back, not with headlines, but with truth. Charles had uncovered Victor's financial ties to a rival company, exposing his attempts to sabotage the merger. The board had backed down, not out of kindness, but because Michael's resolve was unshakable. Tanya had been fired, her betrayal a wound that stung but no longer bled. "I was scared," Aaliyah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, that I'd lose myself in your world. Michael turned to her, his eyes soft but fierce. You didn't. You made me part of yours. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. You're still learning, though. Those pancakes are proof. He laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. Give me time. I'll get there. They sat in silence, the city humming around them. Aaliyah thought of Jamal, who'd volunteered at the art center, his resentment softening into pride. She thought of Elena, who'd painted the center's first mural, a vibrant ode to Harlem's spirit. And she thought of her mother, whose voice still guided her whispering strength in the quiet moments. Her phone buzzed again. There was a message from Jamal. Check the center's schedule. I'm teaching a robotics workshop. You cool with that? Aaliyah's eyes glistened. She typed back. More than cool. Proud of you. Jamal's reply was a single emoji, a fist bump. Michael watched her, his expression soft. He's coming around. He is. Aaliyah said, her voice thick. But it's not just him. It's everything the center, this house, us. I never thought I'd have this. Michael squeezed her hand. You deserve it more than anyone. She looked at him, her heart full. So do you. The moment was broken by a delivery truck pulling up its driver, unloading a crate of art supplies for the center. Aaliyah stood, her resolve steady. Time to get to work, she said, brushing crumbs from her jeans. Michael followed, grabbing the crate. Together. Always, she replied, her smile a promise. Across the city, in a sleek office overlooking Wall Street, Victor Langston sat at his desk, his face a mask of frustration. The email trail Charles had uncovered had cost him his leverage, and his investors pulled back as Garcia Tech's merger stabilized. He'd underestimated Michael and Aaliyah. A new headline flashed on his screen. Garcia Tech CEO and partner open Harlem Art Center. The photo showed Aaliyah and Michael at the community center, her hands in his and her smile radiant. Victor's jaw clenched. He'd lost this round, but he wasn't done. Not yet. The art center's opening day loomed in Harlem, and Aaliyah threw herself into preparations. She painted signs with Elena, organized workshops with Jamal, and rehearsed a new poem for the event. Michael was there not as a benefactor, but as a volunteer, hauling chairs and hanging lights. The work was unglamorous, but there's a shared dream taking root. The night before the opening, Aaliyah stood in the center's empty main room, the murals glowing under soft lights. Michael joined her, his sleeves rolled up, his hands smudged with paint. It's real, he said, his voice soft with awe. It is, Aaliyah said, her eyes tracing the walls. But it's not the end. It's just a beginning. He nodded, pulling her close. For us too. She leaned into him, her heart steady. The world's still out there, Michael. They'll keep talking. Let them, he said, his voice firm. We're not hiding anymore. Aaliyah smiled, her fingers lacing with his. She thought of the notes, the garden, the gala, the photos that had tried to break them. They hadn't. Instead, they'd built something more substantial, a love that didn't bend to judgment, a life that didn't bow to fear. As they locked the center for the night, Aaliyah's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. You won't last. No photo this time, just words sharp and cold. She showed it to Michael, her jaw tight. Victor, she asked. Probably, he said, his eyes darkening. But he's wrong. Aaliyah nodded, slipping the phone into her pocket. She didn't need to respond. The center, the brownstone, the man beside her, they were her answer. The world could watch, whisper, and try to tear them down. But Aaliyah and Michael had chosen each other, and that choice was louder than any headline. They walked home under the spring stars, hand in hand, the city humming with possibility. The fight wasn't over, but for now, they had this: a life, a love, a promise to keep choosing, no matter what came next.